You're listening to Drummer Daily, the only daily podcast dedicated just to drummers, for a free video series explaining how you can become rock solid at playing drums with a click track in just 2 weeks in as little as 20 minutes per day. Visit boomclick.net. Hey, welcome back to more Drummer Daily. I am so happy you're here. I am trying something new today on the podcast, kind of. What I'm doing is I'm kind of walking. I'm still in my third floor studio, which, as you know, is my favorite place to record this podcast. But what I am doing today is I'm actually kind of moving around while I am doing this. And I'm also putting my phone in airplane mode. So, because I've had podcasts interrupted before by phone calls, and I don't want that to happen this time. Like I was saying though, I am moving around in my studio. I'm actually I'm setting up my cymbals. I'm about to practice again on the drums, which you know is one of my favorite things to do. It is actually my favorite thing to do. But I am what I did was I actually let a friend borrow a lot of my cymbals for a session that he has. And so I am using, I'm not calling it the B team because there's some good cymbals here, but I am using some cymbals that I don't normally use. At least I'm using them in different ways than I normally use them. So I've got a Zildjian, what is this? This is a medium crash, so a pretty heavy, big crash. It's an 18-inch cymbal. Normally I use that when I play with 18-inch hi-hats. I play with this as the bottom hi-hat cymbal, actually. But I'm using this as a crash cymbal. So I've got that, and then let's see what else I've got here. I'm putting this medium crash on now. I am using, I'm actually gonna set up a second crash, and it's gonna be this Zildjian K-Custom Fast Crash, a 16-inch, which is definitely smaller than what I normally use a lot. But this is one of the ones that came in that worship pack from Zildjian, so I'm going to set that one up. And then I am going to use for my other ride cymbal, the ride cymbal that I'm using is going to be my other ride cymbal. So I have a couple of ride cymbals. Actually, I have 3 ride cymbals. I just realized that. But I let my friend borrow a couple of them. And so what I'm using today for my ride cymbal is, it is a 20-inch Zildjian K Constantinople, 20-inch, like I said, medium, thin, high ride. Now, I normally use this cymbal when I am doing kind of more rootsy, organic stuff. I use this 20-inch ride cymbal actually as a crash cymbal. It's kind of a crash ride, really. I put it in the spot right in front of me over my rack tom. And I kind of set it low and angled so I can use it as another ride as well. But it washes out really nice and sounds really good. And then as my hi-hats, I'm actually coming over here to my other kit, my Tama kit. I'm taking the hi-hats off of here. And this, I'm letting my friend borrow my K-Custom Dark hi-hats. And so I'm using an old set of Sabian AAX stage hats. Now these are loud, bright cymbals, so you definitely wouldn't want to use these most of the time recording, but it's what I've got. So anyway, I'm kind of moving around while I'm talking, but doing all this setup actually got me thinking about a couple of episodes ago. I asked for your suggestions or your ideas for podcast episodes, just because I wanted to hear from you, and you let me know some ideas about things you'd like to hear about or to have me talk about. And actually, if you haven't and you want to hear me talk about something, please go ahead and send me an email, daniel@danielhadaway.com, and let me know what you want to hear, and I'd love to talk about it. But I got an email and was asked about just kind of how I approach my setup, like using a bunch of pieces, a complex setup versus a simple setup, maybe why I've chosen to go the simple route most of the time, things like that. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about that today. Also, I am super groggy today because I'm recording this on the Monday after daylight saving time, which I don't know if you're listening to this and you're in another country. Daylight saving time, we adjust our clocks forward. So what that means is, we lose an hour of sleep the night that we do it. But then, so like right now, to me, my body thinks it's like, 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock, but actually the clock tells me it's later. So I actually heard a stat about there being like something like 25% more heart attacks on this day, this Monday after the day after daylight saving time than other normal days. So anyway, it's a bad day. I feel so groggy and slow. I've actually had 2 cups of coffee today, which is a lot for me these days. Anyway, all that to say, I'm going to try to get my mind back together here and talk about what I'm here to talk about. You might hear me turn my computer on here in a second. So my setup, I'd love to talk about that. So the reason why I play with a very simple setup now, it's funny because now I'm back to playing a 4-piece kit with a couple of crash cymbals, which is kind of like, I feel like Neil Peart over here. Like I feel like I'm playing with a massive drum kit, which, to most people this isn't very much, but to me it is. And the reason why I started years ago playing a very simple setup, and to tell you what simple to me was I would play with a kick, a snare, a floor tom, and a ride cymbal and a hi-hat, I think. Maybe I'd have a crash sometimes, but just one tom, kick and snare is really the thing. And the reason I did that was out of necessity first. It was when I was playing at church, if I wanted to bring my own gear, if I didn't want to bring my own gear, the drum set wasn't that great. But I found that you can get away with a pretty terrible sounding drum kit if you can muffle the kick drum a lot. If it sounds terrible, you can just make it not sound like anything at all and trust the mics to give you a bunch of low end. And then the floor tom, the same thing. You can really, if you want to, muffle it a lot and it won't sound great, but it's not going to sound terrible. And then I'd always bring my own snare, so that wasn't a problem. But if the drum kit wasn't that great, I could get away with just a kick and a floor tom, and the sound wouldn't be distractingly bad. Or if I decided to bring my own kit and have to load it in at church on Sunday, or even when I was starting out, like when I started touring with All Sons and Daughters years and years ago, we would just drive in a van or whatever we had, or maybe somebody's car. And so if I wanted to bring some drums, it had to not be very big. Couldn't take up a lot of space because we didn't have room for it. So it kind of started out of necessity. But what I learned was that I actually really enjoyed adapting my playing to fewer pieces. And I realized that a lot of times I would just play like I'd play certain drum fills all the time because of the equipment sitting in front of me. And so I wasn't disciplined enough at first to avoid, playing certain drum fills all the time. If I had the pieces there, I'd have to hit them, basically, is what I'm saying. So what I discovered was that by taking things away, I actually forced me to think about what I was doing and think about how things sounded and not just how they felt. Because, doing a drum fill that normally uses 2 or 3 toms, doing that same drum fill where all the tom hits are on 1 tom, it might feel the same if you can adapt the way you angle your body or the way you move, but it's going to sound way different. And so it made, by going to a simpler kit, it actually allowed me to change my mindset about how I played to where I focused more on what the drums, what was the sound that I was putting out, not what was the feeling of what I was doing. And so that was kind of the approach in the real, the necessity, of course, of the whole situation is what made me start doing that. But then once I started doing it, I realized there was a lot of enjoyment I got out of adapting my playing based on my own limitations of what I had to play. And then, so over time, but then I realized too that I actually there is so much to master in just a couple of drums. There's so much there that you can still need to get into and work on. And so people started asking me, hey man, why do you have, or they'd say, I love your simple setup, or they'd say, why do you have such a simple, nothing on your setup? And I would always kind of joke, half be serious, but I'd say, well, I haven't figured out how to play these drums yet. I'll add more when I figure out how to play these. And that's kind of the approach that I have, is that I've got plenty to worry about with just a couple of drums. And I still don't believe that I have enough maturity as a player to play with a bigger kit. So I artificially limit myself. I'm not just being like overly like fake humble or whatever. I really like don't think that I have the maturity as a player. Like if you put a giant drum kit in front of me, you better believe I'm hitting all those toms. Can't help it. So I just have to make myself be limited. But slowly over time, I've discovered that if I've added one or two pieces here or there over time, I do have the discipline now to play those things, but only because I've spent years playing such a simple kit where I completely now think about, like I said before, I completely now approach drum fills and drum patterns out of the thought process of what is this going to sound like to the listener, or what does this sound like in general, not how does this feel to me? Does this feel familiar or easy or not? I go for the sound, not for the feel. And I mean physical feel. Obviously playing with feel is something you want to do, but you know what I mean, how it feels to my body. So I would encourage you, if you've never done it, take some things away from your drum kit. I know a lot of people add things to their drum kit to inspire them. And that can be cool. Like you add, a cowbell or a tambourine. Maybe not a cowbell. I don't know. I actually been thinking a lot recently about adding a cowbell to my drum kit. Don't ask me why. But a lot of people add things to the drum kit for inspiration, but I would encourage you to try it the opposite. Try to take things away and see what inspiration you find. It might be weird or awkward at first, but I think that over time, you can really find some joy and inspiration in it. And then if you really discipline yourself in how you approach playing with those few pieces, you might discover that once you add those other things back, that you don't use them as much, but when you do, it's so intentional and it feels great and it sounds better because you're doing the same thing that I've kind of learned how to do through trial and error, which is play for how it sounds, not for how it feels. So that's what I've got for you today. I'm going to try to wake myself up, take another big swig of coffee, and I'll talk to you again very soon, hopefully tomorrow.